talk about a just transition for all, because as we know, achieving a just transition and promoting decent work creation is one of the objectives of the Paris Agreement on climate change. It is work that is being pursued under the improved forum on the implementation of response measures and also the KCI. And so we wanted to take this discussion a little more in a conversation, but where we can also learn from experiences from a variety of actors that are engaged in this process in the context of the KCI, but also in terms of representatives from countries, member states, and constituencies. So the objective is that we come from Glasgow, where with Glasgow there was this notion of phasing down from unabated coal power and phasing out of inefficient fossil fuels. But as we know, the Pact speaks of making that through a just transition. We have seen recently the IPCC report, the very alarming IPCC report, push for fast action on climate change, but still mentioning that a just transition can be an enabler of more ambitious action on climate change. So we propose to have a conversation around 3 points. What actions are required to turn just transition from the rhetoric to action and the implementation of NDCs as we go to the COP27 in Egypt, where the focus is going to be on implementation. The second question is, how can the impact on vulnerable groups be fully addressed? And these are various categories, from persons with disabilities, youth constituencies, women, indigenous and tribal peoples. And then third, how do we mainstream gender dimensions in just transition strategies? I'm very pleased and honored to have with me in the panel today Ms. Kusum Lata, who is the team lead implementation assessment unit at the Climate Secretariat. Vlad KAIM, Vlad, I call you Vlad because we work together now. We were in Stockholm last week, and I'm pleased to see you again, who is UN Secretary General Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change member, and also contact point of the YOUNGO's Green Job Working Group. We have Ms. Annela Anger-Kraavi, who is a KCI member from Estonia. Annela, it's a pleasure to see you in this different format. And Mr. Ahmed Kamal. I think we now have 2 Kamals in this session. That's exciting. Executive Director, Environmental Compliance and Sustainable Development Office at the Federation of Egyptian Industries. So without further ado, I would like to invite Kusum to kick off our panel discussion. Kusum, over to you.
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me because mic is a little far, but good enough. Okay, thank you. First of all, good afternoon to all of you. And it's a pleasure to have all of you here for this important discussion. This small event, as Kamal said, we have organized together to talk about a very important topic, which is, I think, close to heart of all of us. We know just transition is being seen as one of the enabling strategies for realizing mitigation ambition. And what we are talking about, ambition is not only about numbers. I think what we are talking about when we talk about just transition, we are talking about acknowledging that the reality, we are talking really about people and transitioning of these people. About 3.3 billion workers are there in the world, according to a study which was being conducted by our partner organization hosting this event today, ILO. And many are already suffering from the impacts of climate crisis, whether it is due to heat, stress, drought, flooding, storms, otherwise, or many other reasons. And these impacts will grow and worse if the climate change is left unchecked. But I would say the things do not stop here. The people are also impacted by the actions which are being taken. Governments, we all know, governments adopted a Glasgow Climate Pact at COP26 last year. and which aims to turn 2020 into a decade of climate action and also on support. The package included building resilience to climate change, to curb greenhouse gas emissions, and also to provide necessary support for both of them, building resilience and also for greenhouse gas emissions decline. Nations have collectively agreed to work to reduce gap between existing emission reduction plans and what is required to reduce emissions so that we are in the goal of 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature limit. But I would like to emphasize another highlight of the cover decision, that was phasing down unabated coal power along with phasing out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, and that makes it a decade of transition. But it is also that this transition, what we are talking about by phasing out these inefficient subsidies or the coal, it has to be just. Government and business leaders must work together to help provide policies, programs to facilitate just transition, and there is a need of a green mind shift. These policies and programs need to consider the impacts it has, not only on climate change, but also on people, creating decent work, quality jobs, and in totality, how it is impacting their poverty levels, poverty eradication level. And this is also something coming from our Glasgow decision as well, which mentioned that the financial flows towards low greenhouse gas emission, climate resilient development technology and support in developing countries has to support transition which is consistent with low emission path. So we have seen enough. There is a lot of focus on making this transition just, but exactly what we are doing it. We are not believing in only use of words or languages or papers. We have to see what actions are being done in this regard. So there are a few things which probably I can bring together to you, what has been undone under the convention and some aspects which are being reported by parties. Very, very brief snapshot. First, on the sidelines of SBs or COPs, there are a lot of developments which are taking place. I think these COPs are providing a platform for countries to come together, they talk to their minds and hearts, and then they agree on things. So on the sidelines of negotiations, UNFCCC conferences provide a platform to gain political attention and momentum for just transition. For example, in COP24, there was a Polish presidency who agreed on a declaration which is called Solidarity and Just Transition. At COP25, there was another initiative which is Climate Action for Jobs, which was initiated by ILO. And at COP26, there was a declaration on just energy transition in South Africa. So we are seeing that there are a lot of declarations and commitments coming in from the governments along with each COP from 24 onwards. But where we see actions actually in NDCs, how countries are really committing to do that. We will be surprised to see that when we analyzed this information from NDCs, it does not mean that actions are not happening, but whether this has been recognized at policy level. Only 29% of NDCs have mentioned consideration of just transition in their NDCs, which is not a very big number as compared to the amount of issue we are going to deal together. And we are talking about peoples and their work and their sustainability. So is it enough? Once again, there's not much information available as part of NDCs what is being done. Probably when we get the first BTR report, we will get more information how these principles which have been included in the NDCs are actually being operationalized and implemented, and the impact of them to track when they start tracking progress on them. As of now, even if they have mentioned like how and that just transition is considered, I think it provides a framework or at least an action to be done in that regard. Under the convention, there is a forum on impact of implementation of response measures, which is supported by a committee, which is called Katowice Committee of Impacts. This is a committee of experts Kamal and Annela sitting here, sharing panel with me today, are members of that committee. And this committee and the forum has 4 work program areas, which they implement over 6 years of work plan, which they agreed. And one of the work program area is just transition of workforce and creation of decent work and quality jobs. So if we look at this, 3 years have already passed, 3 more years are to come. So this particular session, they are going to review whether this is adequate, is there any adjustments need to be done, how effective we are on our work plan and implementation. So this is another mandate which is going through. But as per the work which has been done, there are a lot of activities in this work plan which talks about just transition. And recently, there was a paper which has been compiled, which is called as Concrete Examples for Strategies for Implementing Just Transition. It also has a part of economic diversification and transformation. So it has compiled a lot of examples for what kind of strategies countries are adopting to have just transition. There are a lot of key highlights in that paper, which summarizes information on that. A lot of you as a stakeholders have provided your inputs, and I would really urge anytime such kind of call for inputs comes in from this committee, please provide your inputs, because that is something which informs the work of this committee as well, so that the lessons learned can be taken away for wider impact and sharing of experience. But few highlights from that is that there is no one size fits all on just transition. It is important that just transition do not exacerbate inequalities, but is undertaken in a way that it supports farmers and workers. There should not be any rushed approach due to pressure of policy planning, due to the process, or due to the language of climate emergency. Urgency has to be high risk of backfiring and causing more harm than benefits. So when we are planning, it's also good to take time, reflect, and then plan, which is more informed by evidences. If there is an assessment need to be done, take into account who are impacted, what kind of policies, what kind of other mechanisms you have to put in place. So there's a lot of information related to that. The few more points which came out by these examples submitted, just transition is an enabling process, need to be integrated at national climate policy proposals, as well as in the NDCs, NAPs, and GCF proposals. Social protection is critical for managing all transitions. Social protection and creation of decent work are important building blocks when we are thinking about just transition. Understanding and importance of establishing, maintaining relationship with relevant stakeholders is very important. That is why the social dialogue comes into picture. Ensuring inclusiveness and participation of right stakeholders is also important. When you are doing a social dialogue, it is important to have the right people when conceptualizing the process, planning policies, and planning policies for the people who are getting impacted. Involvement of respective associations and cooperative approaches have been found very, very useful as well, because it makes a bond between the government and also between the people who are impacted, and also to have a direct support provided to them. Focus on skills development within just transition is very important, but it is sometimes limited to reskilling of coal miners to help them to get an alternative employment. However, I think it has been brought from a perspective of one of our inputs that it has to be seen more broadly, and are going to see that how these kind of decarbonization across sectors can be incorporated in a curriculum or at a policy level to have more skills done for future jobs. Women empowerment has come out also for just transition as a very, very important thing. Because it guarantees that women and men are equal in their voice when we are talking about new businesses coming in, like renewable energy. We are developing new policies. So when we are start with the right pitch. So that is something came in. And in this term, a lot of projects which are done in small islands found it very useful to engage women, especially in renewable energy sector, training of trainers. So they are being trained and they are training others. It provides them some more social empowerment and helps them to build further. Very few lines on that, because we are also talking about youth engagement here, and I think we have a speaker here on that, so I will not touch too much on that. But I just want to emphasize, I just want to bring to your attention that at COP26, parties adopted Glasgow work program on action on climate empowerment, and which is referred to ACE. And youths have opportunity to make inputs and make a difference in the work plan when it has been implemented, which is more targeted to what needs are from youth perspective. I think I would stop here and let me reaffirm that UN climate change remain committed to support parties and the experts who are critical agents to change, to implement climate actions and strategies. I'm looking forward to reflections of my panel members and also from the speakers today and how policies are actually translating into actions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kusum. That's very important what you started by saying, that ambition is not about numbers. It's about people. It is people that make changes in institutions, in structures, and that leads to results. And so in doing so, we must also recognize that there are different needs in different categories of our society. And that's why we also have the youth constituency here, and then also having Annela as a member of KCI that will give us insights on the paper that work she has been overseeing. But if you allow me, I just wanted to spend a minute on what you said about skills, because just right now in the other room, Bangkok, the Durban Forum on Capacity Building is taking place. And we just discussed this morning the need for skills and skills development. And I think one message that came from there, which I wanted to relay here, is that we must move in actors, member states, and other actors in the climate community from this broad notion of capacity building and realize that we are facing real life situations. There are workers that must move from a job, a particular occupation, to another in the ecological transition. So these are real issues. They are not broad, abstract capacity building and so. And when you look at that, the importance of gender comes very clearly. We see that in our work and the discussion from two angles. First is in the path of decarbonization, there is a lot of focus on male workers. Most of us, we know that if you go to coal mines, there are female coal miners, but obviously most of them are male workers. However, there are many, many female workers in the supply chains upstream, above ground. Now, most programs we see working on compensation, reskilling, retraining focus on workers underground and not necessarily the women above ground. So this is something we must keep in mind. And now when we look at the potential for job creation, have you spoken about this opportunity for new jobs? We find in the ILO scenarios on energy that 20 million jobs could be created by 2030 just by implementing the Paris Agreement on the energy side, on actions on energy, renewables, energy efficiency, and transport shifts. But only 6 million will go to female workers because most of those jobs come in occupations that currently are male-dominated. So therefore, the risk is that even in the green economy, the gender disparities in labor market will just be continued. So that requires policy interventions. And so that's why it's important what we're talking about now, focusing on women, on youth, and categories that may be particularly impacted. But without further ado, I want to turn to Vlad. So Vlad, just to give you the floor, I know the youth perspective, because we talk about an intergenerational equity, but also just the reality today in our society where young people are the majority of us. So actually, you should have been moderating the session and driving it. So over to you, Vlad.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, and thanks to the International Labour Organization and to the Secretariat for the opportunity to be on this panel. And I would first and foremost would like to start with asserting the following notion. We're talking about just transition and using the adjective just as if implying that there is another transition that we could path that we could take on. But in fact, the just transition is the transition. We cannot afford any other transition, because we here are talking about changing a path that will affect not only current generation of workers who will need to change their lives significantly, but also about our generation and generation that is coming after us. We are talking about a process that is already unfolding now, but will take at least half a century more to manifest itself. And we also need to be very mindful, and this is what we are trying to promote in the Green Jobs Working Group in YOUNGO, and what I'm trying to do through my work on just transition matters in the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group, is also the awareness of how just transition, if not catered to well, can become not so just, and oftentimes can move the inequalities that were existing before to other places, or to exacerbate those that were localized already. For example, membership in the Green Jobs Working Group in YOUNGO is nearly 75% made of young people coming from either MENA or Sub-Saharan Africa or South Asian regions. The stakes for these regions are exceptionally high, mostly because, unlike Europe, unlike North America, the resources that they have in terms of the starting capital, capacity, as we mentioned, and many other aspects of access, education, and so on, which I will also touch upon a little later, is much, much thinner. But it is those regions where the future of just transition that should be compatible with continuing growth and bringing people more out of poverty will actually be decided. And these are the sort of discussions that, unfortunately, even in the halls of the UNFCCC conferences, we are still not having to the extent that we can consider satisfactory. Like, for example, we have heard from Ms. Lata about the work that is being done, particularly within the understanding that just transition is something that is pertaining to the mitigation efforts. But can we, for example, envision Article 2.1c that is about directing financial flows to low carbon development actually coming to fruition without a just transition? We cannot, because just transition cannot be the one that is not funded. And so without making sure that just transition is an important element on the table for climate finance negotiations is nearly impossible. Now that we are entering a phase where the official definition of climate finance will be negotiated and provided, when we have started discussions on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, it is important to say it out loud, that just transition needs to be there, mentioned as an element in the definition and as a target in the new collective quantified goal, together with mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, for a very simple reason. That reason being that we have a multitude of countries and communities around the world for whom there is no transition other than green and just transition, for whom there will be no other form of climate action than the green and just transition. We have seen a successful example of the South Africa deal at COP26. But we all understand that there is still a lot of work cut out for us in many other countries, particularly of the global South, whose trajectory of low carbon development is crucial not only for example, the future of 1.5 degrees, but at the same time for future of their labor markets, for their young demographics, for regional and world peace even. And we need to have just transition as an equal pillar of the climate finance discussion, just out of this consideration, because we are now in the stage where investment decisions, already that was happening during the COVID pandemic, stimulus packages to the extent of trillions of dollars are being infused. And they are locking in very particular sets of investments for decades. We are now living in the world where, as per IMF data, we are subsidizing fossil fuels at a pace of $11 billion a minute. How can it be aligned with a just transition? It cannot. For the youth who is coming out of the pandemic, being afraid for their planet, for their jobs, for their health, physical and mental, they are looking up to the just transition because it is actually addressing all this trifecta of anxieties. However, oftentimes the current processes on assuring a just transition, especially at the national level, they leave a lot of gaps to be covered. I will give you just a few examples. For example, when we talk about reskilling and about new qualifications, we oftentimes get a little bit stuck to the university education discourse. But in our world, university education, is it a right or is it a privilege still? I would argue that it's still a privilege. What do we do with the youngsters who do not have access to higher education to be able to gather those green skills that are important? How do we make sure that those who are left behind by the higher education system are able to pick up important technical skills that are relevant for so many green jobs out there without coming out of that education cycle with crippling student debt? This is something we also dedicate a lot of our work to. How do we make sure that the youth who are obtaining their education on green skills in informal conditions have their skills recognized and pathways to jobs provided? This is something we also work on because informality in the job market is a condition that will persist through just transition. And incorporation of informality and youth who are engaged in the informal sectors of economy is something that we absolutely cannot pass by, especially when these jobs are mostly present in the regions where, apart from issues of transition, there are oftentimes significant issues of access, not just access to clean energy, but to any energy, for example. That is why, to wrap it up here before passing the floor back to Mustafa, I would like to emphasize that for the process in the UNFCCC, we need to be more forceful about the language of just transition to make sure that it reflects actual stakes for multiple key processes going on in the negotiations coming to COP27. And secondly, we need to be more forceful in our common action that would leave parties no other way than going together with us on this way. And this is what I told, for example, the day before yesterday, the high-level champions. It's good that we have Race to Zero and Race to Resilience. This is amazing. But we also need to have Race to Just Transition. We need to have a race to 20 million green jobs. And local communities, young people, especially most marginalized, indigenous people, farmers, and many others, we can do it together. We are doing it together in many cases. And we can bring parties along with us. And this is what we hope to see happening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vlad. You raised a number of important issues, and particularly the question of financing for a just transition. I think this is essential, and as discussions are taking place on defining financing, it's critical that we get that recognized. Now, it's not just about mitigation and adaptation, but as Kusum also started by saying, just transition is an enabler of ambition. And that's what the IPCC report itself says. But then one needs the resources to make that happen. And you've raised issues of education and going beyond university, looking at technical and vocational education systems. That's where most of the opportunities will also come from for young people, and the informality, where we know mostly many millions of young women and men around the world working in informal sectors, and where impacts of climate change are much severe because they have no social security. There's no way to adjust. There's nowhere to go in cases of social disruption. But I want to just immediately turn to Annela, because there's this work on much broader categories of those vulnerable that need to be included. So Annela, over to you to bring out that big picture. Thank you. Yeah, so now it's a touchless system. We're modernizing.
I try to press the button as per usual. Is it done now? Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Kamal. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to join this side event organized by ILO and the UNFCCC Secretariat. It's a pleasure to be here as a KCI member. and I'm only one of the 14 KCI members. We have 2 members from international governmental organizations, and Kamal is one of them from ILO. We have also European Development and Reconstruction Bank presented at the body, and the rest of our party experts. So it's an expert group. It's KCI, and KCI supports the negotiations under the Response Measures Forum. So what do we do then? As we support the forum's work, what does the forum do? Forum is a work program that consists of 4 work areas, and these are economic diversification and transformation, just transition of the workforce, and creation of decent work and quality jobs, and assessing and analyzing the impacts of the implementation of response measures. And the 4th one is facilitating the development of tools and methodologies to assess the impacts of the implementation of response measures. So just transition of the workforce and the creation of decent work and quality jobs is in the heart of KCI's work. And we also see it at KCI, it's very closely linked to the economic diversification and transformation, because they often go hand in hand. So what does the KCI do then in order to discuss just transition? I think we need more, I personally think we need more substantive discussion on just transition, and limit it really just to stay focused. I think often when we talk about just transition, it starts to, starts slowly comprising everything and anything. It's just a transition on its own. But what we really mean to low carbon economy, what we really mean is the workforce and creation of decent work and quality jobs. And we have a work plan on the KCI that has different activities that we implement. And 2 of those I've been so far speaking to just transition. One of them I found was really interesting technical paper, and that's also now made to look very beautiful and glossy, and it's available with beautiful pictures, and it's available on KCI's website. Speaks to assessing the impacts of response measures, so in order to understand the need for just transition and economic diversification. And that paper is completed. We invite you to have a look at this and read that. It was interesting because when we were writing the paper, because it consists of assessment methods and also like the element of just transition and economic diversification. So we did not find much academic literature or even like consultants' reports speaking to that topic. So how do you know that you need just transition? How do you identify what do you need? I'll come back to that. And this paper, and the second one we have is a very recent one. It's still work in progress. When we looked at the impacts of implementation of response measures on vulnerable groups and people in vulnerable situations. And there we also saw like that we looked at different groups, but we also looked at, for example, at gender. We looked at indigenous peoples, local communities, youth was also included in the paper. I will be working on that paper more, but we also saw that when the impacts assessment are done, then often these groups or these people in vulnerable situation are not considered because they're just not part of formal modeling and academic discourse. So we have just jobs in most of the models without disaggregating them into men and women or people or youth or elderly. It's just jobs, and even often they are not no disaggregation by skills. So you can't even identify like which sort of free training. So coming back to the assessment paper, that once again I invite everyone to have a look at. So we found that there are many assessment methods out there. So there are economic models that does include labor and wages, as mentioned already, often disaggregated. And then we started thinking, so once we have those, how do we use them in order to find out whether we need just transition? And then we thought that we need to know need to know the questions first the models have to answer. We need some indicators in order to do the work. And then in the paper, we identify economic and social indicators we should be looking at when we establish whether we need just transition and economic diversification. And the indicators we came up with in the paper is looking at jobs, of course. How many jobs are created when you implement a certain response measure? And in response measures, at KCI, we often, when we say response measures, we mean mitigation policies and measures rather than adaptation. It's mostly, I've been focusing so far on mitigation. So the jobs created, of course, like if you build a wind park, you create jobs. But if you close a coal mine, you lose jobs, so jobs lost also. Changes in income. Often people transit from one job to another, and then the incomes change. And then when it comes to social indicators, we thought it's important to look at skills and training of the workforce. Also income inequalities. Do we create income inequalities between sectors, between genders, between ethnic groups? Social security. So what happens to the people during the transition? Do they still have the same social security they had before? Changes in occurrence and severity of pollution-related diseases. So if you transit from coal mining job, a lucky one, you will be reskilled and will be servicing a wind park. What does it mean for your health? What does it mean for other people's health in that region? And also, I think it's important, and we thought it's important also to look at mental health. Well, what does it mean, transition to mental health? So you see, and now if any of you does economic modeling, then you can imagine that you know already that most of these indicators are not included into formal modeling. So, and then we said we really need a lot of qualitative research to go out, to talk to people, to see what is needed, what the impacts are going to be. And once you establish these impacts, then you can actually decide what you need to do. Is there anything you can do? What are the mitigation policies? And here we don't mean climate change mitigation policies, but policies mitigate those negative impacts, policies that enable just transition you need to take, taking into account all these indicators. So I do invite you again to look at this paper, but yeah, it's something, would be interesting to get your feedback on. And I think, and KCI will be doing more work on issues related on just transition and hopefully have many more discussions on that. And when it comes to, just come back to the other paper on vulnerable groups or people's in vulnerable situations, then also we saw that during transition, many more jobs are created for men than for women. And that comes out in the literature. So, just to add there, so how to create more jobs for women during the transition to a low-carbon economy. But I'll stop here, and everyone is very welcome to join KCI meetings as observer when we have the meetings. We have also one of the KCI co-chairs there, Peter sitting here, and also the other one is there. Both of them are here. So please feel free to talk to them and get more information about this body and how you can support. We see also calls for input, and we take inputs from everyone. You don't have to be an observer organization to contribute to KCI's work. But I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annela, and I'm also honored and pleased to welcome the co-chairs of KCI in our conversation. So, dear colleagues, we will just get everybody join the conversation in a minute, but I wanted to turn to Mr. El Sayed. But as Annela said, this paper on the impact of the implementation of response measures on vulnerable groups is particularly important, and I think there's still an opportunity to provide inputs and views, examples, and issues that countries need and parties need to take into account. So that would be very much welcome. But with that, I'm pleased to turn to Mr. El Sayed, that is joining us with Egypt as the incoming COP27 presidency, but also to bring in our discussion here the perspective of social partners, because we know this agenda is not just one for governments. They work with employers and workers' organizations. So from those two hats, so Mr. El Sayed, please.
Thank you. I promise it's short, but 1 minute, fine. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation from the ILO and UNFCCC, and I'm glad to be with you here. And just transition, and we translate it to actions. We have a very good success story between our Federation of Egyptian Industry, which is official representative for private sector industry in Egypt. It's an employer organization. So, and we deal with the ILO for a long time now. We have been in many programs toward women in factories, toward new businesses, entrepreneurs, young people, and to support also the decent work environment, occupational health and safety. And I see that it's very good success when you, what you call it, join the social and the economic payback also together. We are offering small soft loans to factories that helps them to buy equipments with very soft interest rate, and we give them grace period. And of course, this very good economic payback, but we also attach to that the conditions of good, decent work environment for laborers inside the factories. So one of the criteria is to inspect in the factory itself for gender diversity, for how occupational health and safety situation in the factory, how the wages and the labor law implemented inside the factory, and we attach that with the loan criteria. So I think it's very good implementation when you have the economic payback for the private sector owner going together with the benefit for the workers and the laborers inside the factories, of course. This one, and second, we have been in cooperation with Danish Foreign Affairs in a project called DAP. DAP for like 7 years now, and it's mainly for supporting vocational training for the Egyptian young people and for the factories as well. Also for supporting youth in fresh graduate from the universities, and how to build the need and the demand for the market and for those fresh graduate, how to assist them in getting more opportunities. Of course, when I say them, it means both genders inside from the fresh graduate. Again, it's good that you're coming with economic payback with the social impact. So when you solve this kind of equation, you make sure that you have a very good success story. We have been in cooperation with ILO, we have been under DAP cooperation. We, as Federation of Egyptian Industry, is one part of the success stories that the country will present in COP27. We have a Women Council in Egypt. We have very good other success stories from the tourism, from the agriculture, from different sectors, that it's all combined to be presented as good success story. So it's more than 1 minute, but thank you a lot for inviting, and looking forward for seeing you all in Sharm el-Sheikh in COP27. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Said, for giving that example and the concrete initiative that you're taking at the Egyptian Federation of Industries. And I think that brings this notion that social spending is not a cost, it's an investment. And it can lead to returns, and it shouldn't be a sort of an afterthought. And I think this is essential for a just transition. So we very much look forward to further engaging towards COP27. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to open the floor. And we really wanted to have a conversation around what could be done to turn just transition from rhetoric to action, because that is what we need at this moment. So please come in with your own views, your own examples. If there are questions, please feel free to do that. So I see Madame in the front. Please just introduce yourself and you can take the floor. Madame, and then the gentleman from European Trade Union Federation.
Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriel. I'm from South Africa. So yeah, when you were talking about the successful deal that came out of last year regarding the just transition, my eyebrow raised because while it was successful, there's a lot of grey spaces that civil society and communities on the ground don't understand. And it's mainly surrounding the fact that there's a bit of a mistrust with our government and managing of finance, as history will tell you, but also surrounding the fact that a lot of this money would be used in the kind of corporate space, but we don't know how we begin to reform those spaces to serve the people that it needs to serve, especially with unemployment being such a massive issue in South Africa right now. And so it's more of a question that anyone can feel free to answer or leave it in the air. It's surrounding how do we begin to change that narrative and how do we begin to shift that? I mean, when we talk about just transition, you mentioned, Annela, that, there's so many different facets. It's because there are many versions of a just transition. It's a just energy transition, just land, just water. But when we look at it in the different facets and the different avenues, how do we begin to change the narrative that, it's actually just only something that's going to be led by corporate, but it actually needs the people's investment just as much. I think right now there's a big disconnect there because people don't trust corporate, people don't trust government in South Africa right now. And so how do we begin to change that? I think that's how you build it. I think we talk about ambition, a lot, but we don't talk about accountability that needs to come alongside it. So that's kind of my question, if it made any sense at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Benjamin Denis from European Trade Union Federation, representing workers from industry. I think worth reminding that before being a concept popular in Bonn, Geneva, or New York City, just transition is a trade union concept. It's a concept born into the world of work, into labor organizations representing workers. Then for us, it's a bit of a surprise, to be honest, to see a side event organized by ILO, a tripartite organization, unless we have missed reform of the Philadelphia Convention. So it's a bit of a surprise to see a side event dealing with just transition without any trade union representatives in the panel. We believe that it's extremely important to have trade unions in the panel, in the conversation. Why? Because if you read carefully the ILO guidelines dealing with just transition, if you read the letter of the Philadelphia Convention, you realize that social dialogue, involving workers, social partners into discussions related to the world of work is really a key principle of the international system that we have inherited from all those important agreements negotiated after World War II. So for us, it's absolutely crucial to have workers' representatives, free and independent trade unions involved in the kind of conversation we are having today. Beyond the geopolitics of seats in UN side events, it's also important to involve trade unions because we have an expertise on the issue which is at stake today. Translating just transition principles, the rhetoric, into practice is our daily business. This is what my colleagues and I are doing or have been doing for years. We are negotiating with employer organizations agreements at company level. I can mention a series of examples if you want in Europe where companies that will have to manage structural change have involved workers in negotiating collective agreements to anticipate change. It could be ensuring that the right skills program, upskilling program will be provided to workers. It could be negotiating early pension schemes and so on and so forth. I could extend the list if needed. We are doing the same at sectoral level. Of course, all contexts are different, but in Europe we have a series of sectoral social dialogue committees where employers, workers' representatives can discuss all together the kind of measures, the kind of recipes that we want to implement to manage structural change. And we are having same kind of conversation at national or regional level with public authorities, governments, with employers and with trade unions. And this is key for us. And this is much more than a concept. This is just more than a slogan. It must be a practice. And this is what we are doing with our colleagues. It's true that maybe in Europe and in some other countries, we are maybe more advanced than in other regions of the world. But we are also here to exchange with our colleagues from other regions of the world, to share the practice we have, the good ones and the bad ones, because let's be honest, it's not a rosy journey. There are a lot of challenges we have to deal with, including attempts to weaken the ability of workers to create independent, free and autonomous trade unions to defend their rights and represent their interests. And to conclude, we have launched with our affiliates, almost 200 national trade union federations representing workers from industry in 40 European countries, a campaign on just transition. And the conclusion of the campaign was the publication of a Just Transition Manifesto, which details what just transition must mean for industrial workers in European context. If you are interested by that publication, you can just type Industrial Europe Just Transition Manifesto on a web research engine and you will find it. And to really conclude, I think that workers shouldn't be seen and shouldn't be dealt with as a vulnerable group. We want to be at the table. We don't want to be on the menu. There is nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the contribution, and I absolutely agree. I think the notion of just transition, we all know, comes from the labor movements and the trade unions, and I wanted to say that we are sitting here in this format because of the nature of the room. But the intention is to have a conversation, so there's no one sitting, speaking, others listening. That was the setup, and what we wanted, the UNFCCC and the ILO, with Egypt co-presidency and KCI to have a discussion with everyone. So there was not an intention of this event to be structured as a tripartite ILO event. It was just to offer floor so that everybody can engage. And that is why I started by explaining that we discussed the title of this event, A Just Transition for All. But having said that, we know the critical role in driving this agenda from from the tripartite constituents. So I absolutely agree. And Benjamin, if I had seen you that you were in the room, so certainly I would have brought you here to be with us to start the discussion. But perhaps some more examples. I think what you said, in terms of what the unions are doing, what we know is working, what is not working. I think that is also what we absolutely need to hear more. And if there are other members of the group who would like to react, but specifically in terms of how we are turning just transition from rhetoric to action, that will be very much helpful. But I just wanted to also bring to the panel members the questions we've heard from South Africa. If anyone wants to react, this notion of the disconnect between corporations and people and communities. Sivat, please.
Yeah, I can also tell this not from the experience, of course, of, say, negotiating with corporations and everything, but like what also, like, being a youth in multilateral space teaches you in the processes that are of such importance as, for example, the Just Transition deal that is in South Africa, is that ILO, for example, has the concept of social dialogue, and it's implementing it really well and so on. But on the ground, the social dialogue is always being started in unequal conditions. The distribution of power here is the core problem. And unfortunately, the disconnect is related to the fact that this distribution of power, in this case, is so lopsided that for workers, for youth, for people who essentially who are not really like governments or corporations, they do not really see incentives to engage into it or the recourse, because how would they? They would, of course, ask like, okay, so you had this, your business as usual for 40, 50 years, and then like you're just going to turn all so kind, like in one moment. This is absolutely not something that they would be able to trust, especially in the conditions where the governance itself was an issue. So I think the way we can and should start, the way we can and should start addressing this is to calling out the power inequalities in the social dialogue and in this interaction that is going on when we are implementing agreements such as the one on just transition in South Africa. And also a quick quick expression of solidarity with the trade union representative. But we also wanted to let you know that in the Green Jobs Working Group, we are accelerating our cooperation with the trade union constituency precisely to make sure that we would have a voice that is all as one, and to make sure that indeed nothing will be, especially in spaces like this, about us without us. Thank you for calling this out.
Yes, thank you very much, Vlad. Annela, please.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the great interventions. I'd just like to respond that in terms of having trade unions in the room, trade unions have always been in the room when KCI has its meetings. So Tunga has always been there, and also representatives of other trade unions. And I think it's great. And so everyone who has got observer status to the UNFCCC is always welcome to join us. So the doors are open. We have never closed the doors to observers. So and the inputs from trade unions have been incredible. Yesterday we had a workshop on one of the work plan activities where the importance of social dialogue was highlighted and discussed, also among other things, and that was much appreciated. In terms of vulnerable groups, I by no means wanted to call employers vulnerable, but I wanted to highlight that there are different groups amongst employers. It's not just that we can assess and deal with everyone in the same way so that one size fits all. There are women, there are youth, there are elderly, there are different ethnic groups, there are different income levels, so we have to look at those and also understand which group or which part, which employers are more vulnerable to climate policies, the impacts of climate policies, and need more help with just transition. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, I just wanted to echo this point on the distributive effects, because that is an area where there is insufficient understanding of what is the distributive effect of response measures on different groups, income categories, and as I can say, the German G7 presidency has requested the ILO and the OECD to work specifically on a paper looking at what do we know about the distributive effects and policies, measures, fiscal, that governments have taken that can manage that. But just to mention, this is critical. And again, the paper that you are coordinating, Anna, is an opportunity to bring all these views, like we've heard from Benjamin and participants in our session today, to feed into that important opportunity now. But I see there is a ERCST that wanted to take the floor. Madame, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very interesting interventions. I am a policy analyst at ERCST, and Kusum, you were mentioning that you identified 44 in 44 NDCs, you identified just transition considerations and issues. I was wondering also, within the strategies and targets, how is the gender gap or the gender issues considered? Are they being considered in every just transition strategy, or sometimes it is left on a side? Because we see from some just transition packages in the EU or just transition issues in the EU where gender is not really the priority. I mean, it's not included inside the fund, or it's not on the top of the priority. Well, it should be also included in every just transition strategy, I think. But just wondering, from your research and study, what was your perception on this?
Thank you very much. Kusum, do you want to just comment on that?
Yeah, so thanks for this question. Yes, in this analysis, when we did the first level of research, was more like whether just transition is even mentioned in the NDC or not, whether the country is thinking about transitioning in a just manner, or it is not at all concerned about it. So that was the first level of, I would say, our research was conducted. And later on, when we go into deeper, it is more about then whether it is about the workers or it is about, as probably you might have seen nowadays, just transition, although it is referred to transition of people and workers, sometimes it is even also used as a broader element. And I think somebody has mentioned today also that we are talking about energy transition, we are talking about gender transition, we are talking about technology transition. So I think this concept of just transition is also been referred in various forms. And similarly, you will find in NDCs also that this has been used widely. However, this 44 or 29%, when I mentioned it was more from the workers' perspective. It did not consider other elements. If NDC is talking about energy transition, they did not count into this. Talking about specific about gender, I cannot really say that this is a subset, because sometimes gender is being considered in NDC but not mentioned as a transition, as a part of just transition. Right now, most of the NDCs, I would say, is talking about there is an impact on people, there is an impact on workers, and a just transition policy is required, or strategy is required. In some of the NDCs, specifically, I think more commonly coming from European countries or developed countries who have put forward a very concrete plans of having just transition, for example, having a just transition committee or a just transition fund. However, from developing countries, world NDCs are more at a higher level. I think in few few of the countries where I think with the support of some climate promise programs, which are also supported by ILO, they have conducted some kind of analysis on impacts and have incorporated those information like green jobs, number of assessments of jobs and who are impacted. But that's, I think, too much of nitty-gritty details in some, and that's where probably I would stop at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kusum. Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, just, hi, I'm Bruno de Brusin with the International Transport Workers Federation. Just to follow up on a couple of the comments that I heard in the spirit of sharing, at the ITF, we've done a lot of work on just transition for transport workers who are being affected by different processes, increasingly electrification of transport around the world. And we see a lot of the challenges essentially go back to what my colleague was saying about often the lack of not just social dialogue, but specifically collective bargaining. The corporate sector, especially in the Global South, where there might not be that long a tradition, tends to be very reluctant to talk about collective bargaining and establish a collective bargaining process as a way to promote a specific just transition. That will allow you to have time to negotiate a transition, to look at the holes in the program as well, including issues of women and youth, young workers, how are they going to be incorporated and employed. And I think it just goes back to the core of some of the issues that we've definitely been having. I wanted to say that one of the big questions for us is, when we're talking about climate finance and how just transition is going to be incorporated into it, whether we can also add conditionalities that guarantee that any money that goes to the just transition program is going to at least abide by the 8 ILO fundamental rights, right? Are we going to have guaranteed right to strike as part of any program that receives that kind of funding? Should respect workers' right to strike, should respect workers' right to organize, to collective bargaining. I think that will be a key improvement in what we have. And just a last comment on South Africa, which here my colleague brought up. It is, in our view, one of the examples where just transition can also bring negative conditionalities in terms of what it could imply for South Africa privatizing its energy systems. So this is something also that we want to take care of, because usually privatizing processes mean to a loss of rights in the experience of most countries, especially in the Global South. But I just wanted to highlight those as important issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, that's a critical point, and I think that's also this notion of getting into specific sectors like industry, transport, energy, agriculture, where we know there has been a lot of focus on the energy sector, but the transformations in the economy and society are beyond energy. It's very critical. So ladies and gentlemen, we have 15 minutes to go in this session, and from what I have heard, I think there may be 3 ways to zoom into this moving from a narrative, from a rhetoric to action. And one is the NDCs themselves. We know the NDCs are the operational plans in the short term for the Paris Agreement. It's very encouraging that a number of NDCs, not too many, but a few at least, have reflected decent work and just transition elements in there. The question is, how do we make sure that implementation happens and that countries actually report on those elements on just transition and decent work for NDC implementation? The second is what we've talked about on financing. Now, what can we do to ensure that it happens? And in my view, there are 2 possible entry points. One is that there are global climate funding mechanisms. There's a Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility. None of these specifically finances just transition as such. And as a matter of fact, the International Labour Organization has been queuing for accreditation to the Green Climate Fund for now nearly 10 years, and it's not happening. So I think there is something that must be done on locking out climate finance for just transition objectives. The other is domestic financing. There's a lot of effort on the integrated national financing frameworks, the INFFs, how do we ensure just transition is reflected in there? So these are some possible entry points. And the last one is what many have referred to, the South Africa model of COP26. And I think this is important because I know that within the UN system, there is an effort to replicate that model in other countries. I know the UN Deputy Secretary General was in Indonesia just a few days ago, so this is meant to be done in Indonesia, in India, in Vietnam at least. So therefore it's important to learn from what is working well or not in the South African model so that this could also be taken as partners engaged in other countries like India, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So with those, may I just open the floor again for feedback? And I also see Bert Dewell from the ITC. Bert, so very happy to welcome you and hope you join us in the conversation. But first I see Madame over here.
So you mentioned India as one of the countries along with Indonesia and Vietnam where besides South Africa, a just energy transition partnership is being offered. And so therefore the experience of South Africa remains extremely relevant for us. What we hear also is that the 8.3 billion apparently, which is likely to be mobilized and delivered for that just energy transition, only a very small part of it, 30 million or so, is a grant finance. In terms of some of the preliminary papers that we have seen about a just energy transition partnership to India, it is largely an investment in renewable energy to transition away from fossil fuels, but very little on the people and workforce transition. And that seems to be a very critical missing piece. Obviously, that is still work that is being developed, but I think having been a part of this conversation and a discussion today has been extremely useful for us because it helps us understand the gender issues that are involved in the workforce transition and how actually an enriched transition program can be worked out. So I wonder if you could tell us, give us a little more details about the South African package that's been offered. What does it actually entail? Has it taken off yet? What's the kind of time frame for it? If there's some information on that, it would be helpful. Thank you so much. Just one other last point. In the IPCC reports, they mention some instances of maladaptation. But there is no mention of something called a mal-mitigation. I'm not sure if that's even a word. But as was mentioned by Vladislav very eloquently, any transition program that does not in itself incorporate a workforce just transition is an example of mal-mitigation. So I thought that's something that I felt when I heard him speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, I think on South Africa, there are certainly delegates from South Africa, like Madame just sitting behind you, Madame. That might also be interesting to share, and then we'll be happy to connect with government officials and social partners also for South Africa. But I see Madame would like to respond first.
Just a quick on that. So that's the issue that I was trying to raise earlier, is that there's a massive disconnect on what's actually going on the ground. If it's going to affect the people, but conversations are only being had at a certain level, that's where the issue comes in. And so my question is, you mentioned how important it is to learn the good and the bad, but how do you actually get the bad if the people on the ground aren't consulted? So if you come in and you do a case study, cool, this is what they've been doing with the transition so far, cool, everything is up to code. But people weren't actually engaged. How do you know what the actual true flaws are? Because there are the flaws that are presented to you, and then there are flaws that are hidden. And so I'm wondering, how do we begin to uncover those? I mean, right now, as the furthest we've gone is we've set up a council to actually monitor the money, which is brilliant. Many South Africans are really happy about that because we can't just allow it to sit in the air. And so the council is sitting where it is, and it's beginning the process. They've begun the Presidential Climate Commission that was set up by the current president, President Cyril Ramaphosa. He's established a climate change commission, And that there in itself is very good because it helps civil society have a voice in the way we frame a just transition. But the issue that comes alongside that is that they're just an advisory body. And so they can't really make our departments do anything that the departments don't want to do. And so it's a give and take, but that's kind of where it is right now. It's in its very early infant stage, but it is looking promising. But the issue is that if you aren't a part of it on a day-to-day basis, like I am in the work that I do, your trust is not really going to be there for it at all. You know, right now, many people don't even know if it's, yeah, you can have the money, or is it a loan with interest? And why is it a loan with interest if it is, and why isn't it not reparations, you know? Especially surrounding climate, you know, the fact that we are continuously being extracted from as a country, as a people. And so I think that's just an update on where we're at, and the concerns that come from the ground is just how do we begin to show the true false and the kind of true failures if we aren't, you know, being actively engaged and participated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see Bertual behind, and then Madame.
Okay, thank you. Apologies for coming late to this meeting, but I was not intending to take the microphone, but as you flagged my entrance, so I was a bit put on the spot. First, I want to say 2 words on the South African deal. We think that it definitely has the promise in it to be a model for other countries, like our colleague from South Africa was explaining. I just wanted to indicate that the social dialogue structure that South Africa set up with NETLAC, with the Presidential Commission, where the trade unions and the employers are represented, that's a model that we think can guarantee the good implementation of these means. Second, it's good as trade unions to be at the table, but if you have no clue what it's all about, it will not help very much. So we are very happy that we could work with our South African affiliates, COSATU and other unions, to build up this capacity to understand the challenges of the energy transition. Because that's very clear that there is this promise from the funders to give $8.5 billion to the energy transition in South Africa, but the work still has to be done. It has to be started yet on where it's going to and what will be the impact of it. And in order to have this guarantee, I think that the declaration from Glasgow on just transition for donor countries can be a very good guideline for all the other countries that are in the pipeline to receive this support from donor countries. And that's what we really would like to see in Sharm el-Sheikh, that if other proposals appear, then they should respect, recognize, build on this declaration that was set up, negotiated, and 30 countries signed in Glasgow. And finally, I'm very happy to see Annela on the panel, to see other KCI and response measures people in the room, and of course Mustafa Kamal, who is also a KCI member, because this is very useful and important material that you are presenting here, and the work that the ILO is doing with the Climate Action for Jobs initiative. And I think it's a very good way to feed into the response measures work that all of you are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it's unfortunate because we did not know, Kusum and I were putting in place this event running between different things. We didn't know that ITC, ETUC, and the transport union will all be here, so we would have organized this session differently. But thank you so much. And I think, Bert, what you said, the Just Transition Declaration adopted at COP26, can that be proposed as a starting point of engagement in what we now refer to as the South Africa model? And can countries that are going to enter such partnership somehow be asked to endorse, because that declaration was signed by over 30 countries at Glasgow. So that's an idea to pursue, and I'm happy to take it with the UN, the core principles, the climate principles group, where both UNFCCC-ILO and UNEP are members. So we need to wrap up with a panel, but I saw there was Madame here, and then I see the co-chair, Peter, who would like to take the floor. So maybe we go in that order. Oh, no. So that's, I'm sorry for that, because the mask, you don't know. No, that's...
So Jeremy Anderson from the International Transport Workers Federation. And Mustafa Kamal, I just want to pick up on one really important thing that you said around the NDCs. And last year, we had 144 ITF affiliates write to governments calling for to get much stronger just transition provisions in NDCs specific to transport. And I can't say that we got a great response, but we also know that the Glasgow Declaration has called for all NDCs to be revised. So on the trade union side, we see this as a major priority to engage governments around NDCs, because we think there is a lot of room for improvement there. And Mustafa Kamal, as we're in an event together, I just have to mention, I think, another very important development in this area, which we're also both involved with, the Maritime Just Transition Task Force, which Bruno was talking earlier about, the importance of social dialogue. Maritime does have a long-standing tradition or infrastructure around international social dialogue, which helped us set up this task force at the global level. And the first thing that we're working on is a study on seafarer skills. But I do want to emphasize, despite all those advantages, it's still very important, as Vlad was saying, just to take it step by step in terms of the power inequalities in that social dialogue process. We have a number of the employers who want to talk about just transition, and as trade unions, we need to constantly remind them, as my colleague Benjamin was saying, that's a discussion with us, not about us. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, and also for mentioning the maritime initiative with the Global Compact, and where we are engaging with ITUC and IEAs as well. So, Peter, over to you, please, and then we come back to colleagues for a recap.
Yes, I'll be very brief. Actually, I'm speaking as Singapore as a party. First point, I'd like to thanks for organizing this event, a very important event. The notion of just transition is so important. Obviously, vulnerable groups, we need to address their concerns. But I just want to speak about workers. Workers are central to the climate challenge, and particularly so in Singapore, which do not have any resources, including energy. The only resource we have is workforce and workers. So therefore, just transition has been an important issue even before climate change became an issue. So it becomes even more important now. So in that regard, I'd like to congratulate the KCI members for doing an excellent job. In all their works, the notion of just transition has been, the work has been done, and good points have been flagged. My colleague Annela actually drew out some of these points. So I want to congratulate the KCI for the good work, and certainly more work needs to be done. I just want to pick one point relating to the specific example of Singapore, which someone mentioned earlier as well. In Singapore, we have a tripartite system, meaning the government, the trade union, and employers' federations, which represent workers. They meet together regularly since our independence in 1965, but more so now, because as we support the low carbon transition, move away from the use of fossil fuel energy efficiency measures, it is a given that some workers are going to lose jobs. So therefore, the issue of workforce enforcement becomes very important. Training, reskilling, and upskilling becomes very critical. So therefore, in Singapore, we are devoting a lot of energies in terms of having a whole of coordination with the Manpower Ministry, with the Trade Ministry, Energy Ministry, so there is a holistic response through the tripartite system. So it's very critical, and And I'd like to just close by just quoting what Kamal said earlier. Just transition is an enabler. I'd like to also highlight the intensity and the success in which we do just transition will also incentivize climate ambition. Because if workers are trained and they can go to new jobs in renewable energy industries, then we will have the support in the whole country towards climate action. So that's a very important point. Enablers and incentivizing and just transition is very critical. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think we now have come to the end of our time. I just would like to invite colleagues here to maybe take less than a minute, if one last message before we go. Perhaps we start with Annela or Vlad.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Thank you, Kamal. Just to say thank you to everyone, and just to reiterate again that KCI, when we have KCI meetings, then the doors are wide open, and you're very welcome to join and provide input. And thank you all.
The message for me would be that we need to put the pedal to the metal when it comes to mainstreaming just transition even further. We talked about finance. Now we have starting global stocktake. This is the perfect place to ask why we have only 44 NDCs that are mentioning just transition, not 193, and how many of those 44 are actually qualitative. So let's use these platforms to make sure that just transition has its rightful place in the UNFCCC framework, and the inequalities of power that we talked about are actually meaningfully addressed. And let's remember also, the negotiations on just transition, they not only happen between the countries and the parties at COPs or elsewhere, they are also happening, that's even more important factor, is between workers and employers. This is the negotiations that we also need to follow very closely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And one small comment. Thank you for your comment. I totally agree with you. Thanks.
I would say that I have learned a lot today from all the interventions which have been provided. I have been enlightened. These are the issues which are very important for us also to take it forward. And all the comments which have been said, especially by KAIM, like this is the time for us to look into why less NDCs, not everyone, how to make them more operational. And I would also like to see that how this, because when we say about employer and employees, it's also what international corporations and international governance mechanisms like this can help to facilitate these things happening. So this is the time to look into those aspects as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kusum. I think we were agreed on NDCs, implementation, the financing, and what to do with this model. And for me to end, one word is no more side events on just transition without the workers. So that's not only from me, but for everyone. So please remember that. But thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us in this event. I hope you find it useful and have an excellent rest of the day. And again, thank you for joining us in the conversation. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We didn't have time to meet in advance because I told Mete I wanted to touch base.
Annela, I wanted to ask you just one.